The Senate has passed for second reading the 2025 budget proposal, but leaves the concluding work on the budget till January, when it will return from the Christmas and New Year holiday. It also referred the budget bill to its Committee on Appropriation for further legislative action. Arise correspondent Omo Bazuaye tells us more.
A day after President Bola Tinubu presented a proposed budget of 49.7 trillion naira to the National Assembly, Senate intensifies work on it as lawmakers deliberate extensively on the general principles of the proposed budget bill. The budget bill is the only item on the order paper on the day. In his lead debate, Senate Minority Leader Okoyemi Bamidele seeks support from his colleagues to pass the bill for second reading.
The 2025 budget proposal, christened Budget of Restoration, Securing Peace, Rebuilding Prosperity, strikes at the very core of the Renewed Hope agenda and demonstrates this administration's commitment to stabilizing the economy, improving lives, and repositioning our country for greater performance.
President Bola Tinubu on Wednesday presented the budget and, in a bold and ambitious move, predicated the parameters on inflation dropping from 34% to 15% and a staggering growth rate of 4.6% from 3.4%. The president also pegs the exchange rate at 1,500 naira to $1, expecting also that Nigeria's crude oil production would increase to 2.06 million barrels per day.
I applaud the deployment of 4.91 trillion naira to defense and security in order to protect the lives and property of the people and for the people to engage in meaningful economic activity, especially agriculture.
How do we drive investments when our borders, when our space is so insecure? So to this extent, the attention to defense is commendable.
Some lawmakers, however, raised a few concerns, especially about the money Nigeria plans to spend on debt service, 15.8 trillion naira, which is almost a quarter of the total expenditure of 49.7 trillion naira, the largest in Nigeria's history. But to some others, while the budget looks huge in naira terms, it is still relatively small, even by African standard, when converted to dollar.
I'd like to mention that the problem of the amount of money for debt servicing is still a source of worry to me, because that is approximately 1/3 of the total budget, 15.08 trillion for debt servicing. That is very likely going to put pressure on the available resources for capital and other needs.
At the end of the deliberation, Senate passed the budget for second reading, referring the document to its Committee on Appropriation for further legislative action. The committee has 4 weeks to complete the assignment and revert to plenary when Senate returns from Christmas and New Year holiday on the 14th of January.
A lot is expected from us in this chamber to make sure that every kobo that is being appropriated in this budget, in the 2025 budget, is spent, and our oversight functions should be carried out in such a way that the real benefits for the people of Nigeria is realized.
The 2025 budget bill comes in rather late from President Bola Tinubu, leaving lawmakers with very little time to have it passed on time to beat a December deadline and for the president to have it signed into law by the 1st of January, as it is customarily done.
Once we come back in January, we can get cracking. If there is need to call you back, in line with legislative practice, while you are on holiday, we'll do so. So don't forget that like they call it in the army, I think reservists. You are on reserve. You can be called back anytime if there is need, so that we can convene in the national interest.
The proposed 2025 budget is the second to be presented by President Bola Tinubu. Omo Bazwai, Arise News.
Meanwhile, the House of Representatives Committee on Public Accounts has recommended the delisting of the National Examinations Council, NECO, University of Ibadan, and 22 departments and agencies from the 2025 budget over unaccounted funds allocated to these agencies in 2024 and the previous years. The chairman of the committee, Bamidele Salam, says that lack of discipline on the part of institutions affects the efficient implementation of Nigeria's budgetary allocations every year. Joining us now on this show to discuss the efficient implementation of Nigeria's budgetary allocations and how it will impact the economy and transform lives of citizens is Tilewa Adebajo, Chief Executive Officer of the CFG Advisory. Tilly, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Compliments of the season.
Good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Compliments of the season to you too.
Ayo and Dr. Abati.
Yeah, so they say budget of restoration, stability and securing stability and prosperity. How will this budget 2025 impact on economic growth? We have very serious problems, unemployment, inflation. From what you have read, how will it impact on economic growth? And given the concern raised by Senator Akubundu in that footage that was shown, that report that was shown, he says debt service is about a third of the budget.
32%.
32% of the budget. So if you are going to spend almost 16 trillion to service debt, and if you add that together, it's not up to what has been allocated for education, health, and some other strategic aspects. So we make the money, we use it to pay debt, or we borrow, we add to revenue, we pay debt. So how would this budget impact economic growth?
Thank you very much for that very important question. I think, first of all, let us take a look at the pros and cons of the budget. One of the most important things for me that people are not highlighting on this budget is that for the first time in a long time, there's no allocation for fuel subsidies. And I think that that is something that for me is very important. It is taking us over a year and a half. This government will be in February next year, which is just a month away. It would have been 2 years since this government was elected. There has been a hard road of putting the cart before the horse in terms of the whole issue of subsidy removal, foreign exchange liberalization. It's been a long, hard road that was not necessary. So at least we've come to a point where the $10 to $15 billion a year we used to see in the budget towards subsidy is no longer in the budget. So the question now is that the savings that we have made from those subsidies, how are we applying them to the growth and development of the country? And like you've said, there are still serious issues that are affecting the Nigerian economy. One of the most important issues for me, which we do not talk about much, is unemployment. The unemployment data is 4%, which for me is very unrealistic. And I think we need to look at that. How do we grow the economy? We're still in stagflation. And we understand that for us to grow this economy with 200 million people, we're looking at a minimum of 8 to 10% GDP growth on a sustainable basis. Our current levels of GDP growth at 3.24% is not going to resolve that problem. It's not going to shift the needle, as I've seen. So there are a lot of serious reforms that we need to take in terms of structural reforms of the economy to help us as to how we're going to move this economy forward and grow the Nigerian economy. Now, as this budget, as you've said, one of the cons of this budget also is the fact that we have now replaced the subsidy with debt service, unfortunately. So if you take a look at the quantum of debt service, is actually 16.327 trillion. That's the total debt service. Half of that is domestic and half of that is foreign. So if you take a look at the total of that, using the 150 to 1, that's about $10 billion in debt service. Half of that being domestic, and of course, as said earlier, 32% of your budget. I think Rotus made some calculations yesterday that he calculated education, at health, infrastructure, and defense and security. The total of all those line items, which are very critical, is only 14 trillion. Meanwhile, the debt service is 16.327. The recurrent expenditure is only 14 trillion, which is about $9 billion. Debt service is 16.32 trillion. Capital expenditure, 14.8. Debt service, 16.3. And of course, unfortunately also, we have a deficit financing for this budget of another 13.8 trillion. So if you look at the carryover of the deficit financings from previous budgets from this administration, we're looking at close to 20 to 25 trillion in terms of deficit financing. So it's important that we need to restructure the balance sheet of the federal government. So while we have come across with this budget, the pronouncements on inflation and all those things are also there. So it is important that the reforms now have to be at the fiscal level. We have a central bank now that is focused, a central bank, an institution that has now been rebuilt. The current governor, Mr. Olayemi Cardozo, I believe, has restored confidence to that institution.
A central bank that has not published its accounts?
Well, the accounts of the central bank, I believe, should be ready. I don't know the details of their accounts, but that is something that we're waiting for. But in terms of, because, there were challenges with the Emefiele accounts that KPMG did initially. So we're looking forward to them releasing their 2023 accounts. But eventually, I think what is important that the central bank has done is that the monetary policy pronouncements have been solid and have been data-driven. We now have a foreign exchange system that is transparent. And right now, what we're looking for in the market now is price discovery. And we have a situation in the central bank now whereby the monetary policy people are looking at the data. Yes, they looked at inflation at 24% this year. This was their target. But because things were not happening on the fiscal side, they continue to increase rates. So the pronouncement of the government that they want to get inflation to 15% is something that will have to wait until the next monetary policy for us to see. But overall, I believe that what needs to be done now is that there needs to be proper coordination because, the Ministry of Finance have also been successful in financing debt, but we've reached the headroom. So it is important now that the government restructures its balance sheet based on what we're seeing in 16 trillion of debt service. It's time for them to sell down assets. And as I've said before, by selling down some of these JV assets, we can raise between $35 to $50 billion to be able to help us restructure the federal government's balance sheet. So my point is that the job has been done on the monetary policy side. We have seen increase in the reserves, but not only in the quality, but also the quantity of the reserves. So right now, on the fiscal side, we need that restructuring. Asset sales need to happen. And we've seen some positive signs. The Renaissance Shell deal has been approved. Seplat has been approved. Shell has also been approved. Shell is also going to Bonga North. And you can see that there's confidence within the oil sector returning to boost production. A new bid of license rounds was just been announced. And I think if the government should continue along those momentum by selling down some of these JV assets to raise money, we can begin to think about within the next year and a half to look at oil production at close to 2.5 million barrels. But more importantly, I think what is more important is the gas. Because the biggest project we have in Nigeria today is LNG, which is an $8 billion investment. But unfortunately, LNG as it is today, which is a goose that lays the golden eggs, is only able to secure supply of gas for 50% of its operations. So it's only operating at 50% capacity. So we need to boost production of gas in all these fields to be able to supply not only LNG, but to develop Train 8 and all other investments So the whole essence now is not so much the budget, but getting the policies right to be able to help us grow the economy.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. Now, I've just seen a detail of some of the line items of the budget and just scrutinizing it, because this would give us an indication of what this government or this administration is serious about.
Yes.
And there are some figures or some allocations that are a bit concerning. So I'd asked the question offline that the statutory transfers, the development commissions, whether Niger Delta, Southeast, Southwest, get a considerably higher budget than we have for what we basic health provision fund, basic education fund. So it means that we prioritize these commissions or development commissions to health and education in Nigeria currently. Beyond that, if you look at the line items as well, for instance, in recurrent expenditure, as a whole, recurrent seems to again be higher than capital expenditure. So it means we're spending a lot of money on recurrent expenditure as opposed to infrastructure, even though the president had said that he was very big on infrastructure, this administration would build. But the Ministry of Youth has about 444 billion allocated to it, over that. Compared to other ministries like solid minerals, like in even agriculture, it's a paltry, the disparity is a lot. Does that give an indication, what is the Ministry of Youth spending on recurrent expenditure to that extent or to that amount? It would be great to just have to have some clarity on that.
Well, you see, when you take a look at these line items, because when we were analyzing the details of these budgets, for instance, this is why it's important to understand that these expenditures are not new. There's a trend to all these expenditures, and there's a reason why policy formulation is going in those directions. As you know, the regional development agencies are political, yes, and it's for intervention. So there's specific interventions that goes into that area, possibly because of derivation purposes in terms of the Niger Delta, because a lot of the oil is coming there. So they're doing that to be able to secure. All those are projects that are going to be able to use to secure the oil and gas industry. In the other regions where you have conflict, it is being used to be able to resolve the issues of terrorism. So the social intervention programs they are going to use to support the youth in those areas to be able to reduce their influence of the terrorists on those other areas. So there are lots of other strategic and security reasons why some of these things happen, especially with the Niger Delta, because not only do they get derivation from the budgets, but also these agencies are also supposed to be another extra area so that the people in the Niger Delta can feel that since they are producing the oil, they are benefiting.
I mean, it's not just the Niger Delta. We have the Northeast Development, Northwest
Yes, those are all securities.
Southeast,
those are all security-related issues in terms of intervention, and you can see, and that's why it's important for us to pay attention when they're setting up all these commissions.
Yeah, of course.
And what they're doing.
Yeah,
and
I think
it's
that's
also
even the most important thing to justify the amount of money allocated to them.
And to see whether those interventions are reaching the people that they're supposed to do. So
Absolutely.
really, that's really where the key is in the monitoring.
How about the youth, the Ministry of Youth, for instance?
I don't really have much data on that as to what the Ministry of Youth does, but I'm a bit at a loss to that, so I can't really say much on that. It'd be interesting to know what they are doing with this amount of money when agriculture has less than half of what is budgeted to the Ministry of Youth, health and the others. But you need to look at those items very carefully also, so that you are not comparing apples and oranges, because there are 3 line items you are looking at. There is not only the overheads.
Yeah.
There's the overheads, there's the recurrent, and then also the capital.
No, it's recurrent. I mean, this is
exactly.
just
So you need to look at it as a total.
Yeah.
And I think you get a better picture when you look at total instead of zeroing on recurrent.
The total is still higher.
Yes.
Looking at the total is still higher. But I'll just leave it.
At a time like this, why are we sparing this humongous amount on the presidency, where you have other areas that need more attention? Because I was just checking through, the data set. Thank you so much for the data set you sent. Because that has always been the cause. Take, for instance, look at last year, for instance. The president went ahead on this satisfaction journey to buy himself a jet, which the National Assembly has said, we didn't make due appropriations for that. They said they had bought one way or the other. We don't know how that money came till tomorrow, and some other factors. So looking through the line item, see a lot of money being spent, related to one certain area, money being spent on disposables like cars and things like that.
You see, unfortunately, this is the wrong time for you to have this discussion.
How?
which is what I always tell people. You see, we don't, when the budget is being prepared, what were you doing? The budget is already going through a second reading, and it's probably going to be passed. You see, so the question now is the fact that at the time the budget is prepared, where is the activism that we have?
Inputs when the budget is being prepared.
Of
It's not what they just give us that we react to every year.
That is where the problem
is. There a call for public participation when the budget is being prepared? Did you see any circular to that effect? Can you please let us know?
No, you see.
Maybe I didn't see. Maybe
you see, what I'm trying to say is that you need to be prepared, okay? Because what is important for me is what the impact of this budget will be on the economy. Okay, I'm not, the whole essence of going through line by line allocation as to what the presidency got and all those things get, that is where you have your legislators. That is why you have your House of Reps members.
We're still in process at the
moment. So what my question is, this budget is now going to be approved. Okay, these are questions that would have been asked in August and in September because a lot of all these things were done. They have the public hearings, but you know, so this is really not the time because it's already too late. It's done. So that is why I say that, you know, the advocacy groups that you see, the groups that monitor budgets, the people that do all these things, they don't do that. So if you want to do that, then you need to be able to ask the questions. You need to be able to reach those ministries because you are also an advocate here. So you should be able to. No, it's not to the public. You need to contact those ministries and ask those questions. And because these ministers go to defend their budget. The DG of the budget was here yesterday.
Yeah.
Why didn't you ask him these questions?
Yeah.
He was here yesterday. Okay. So he was the person the DG budget was here yesterday, and it was also on your program the night before. So when these guys are here, you don't ask them those questions.
We ask them the questions.
These are the ones
we asked him about it.
I asked him.
Yes.
I think he didn't respond to.
Yes.
I said Tanimu Yakubu yesterday.
Yes.
I asked him, this is their 15% inflation target.
Yes.
How are they going to get it?
Yes.
Are they going to rebase inflation and GDP? But the explanation he gave, I don't know whether it was clear to me or not.
He danced around that.
And then you said positive side is that there's no subsidy in this budget 2025. Yes. Well, they claim some other positives. Foreign reserve.
Yes.
They say it's now about $42 billion.
Yes.
Right? And that trade surplus is 5.8 trillion. And that exports are rising. Which exports are rising? Non-oil exports, perhaps. So that's on the positive side. But how are they going to get that 15% inflation rate?
Well, they couldn't beat 24%.
Thank you very much for that question. I think, first of all, the DG budget did not focus on the inflation issues. And that for me is a concern because that is not his territory. That is the preserve of the Central Bank of Nigeria. And I think that when they make those sort of statements, they need to allow the Monetary Policy Committee, which is an independent body, to be able to make commentary on that. Yes, it is important that they might say, okay, we are targeting inflation of 15% because we believe that there are certain things that we might do to help that. But they are in the process of rebasing both the GDP and inflation. You know, and if you take a look at the weightings that they're looking at, they might want to change one or two weightings. But if they're not careful, what you'll find out is the fact that the rate of inflation might actually be higher and the rate of our GDP might actually be lower than what it is today because of that devaluation. And the DG budget also himself admitted that the reason why the budget went up was because they moved the foreign exchange from 1,400 to 1,500. So you can see why the FAC allocations are becoming higher. So if they use 1,600, they'll get more money for FAC. So those are those subtle differences that you can begin to see. So now when you talk about a lot of all these things you're saying, we need to have a holistic positivity. What is the benchmark for Nigeria's growth? How far are you from that goal? We're not growing this. If you don't grow this economy at 8%, we haven't started. They're talking about a 1 trillion
or even a double
GDP,
digits.
or double digits, 8 to 10%. But let's even start with 8 to 10%. Very important. So those are the goals that we need to see and how we get there. So in terms of inflation, yes, you might say we are looking at 15% inflation. We might be seeing that. Let the central bank come out, which is what I've said, because I have confidence in what the central bank is doing because they have an orthodox stance. You see how they're moving, you see their structure, and you see what they've done to the markets. So for me, what we need to do is that the central bank has actually done CRR of 50%. That's very, very tight. For every 100 naira that we put in the bank, the central bank takes 50% and locks it up. So the banks only have 50% of their funding available to lend to the economy. So how do we grow the economy? So these are the challenges that we need to see how we move to the next phase. So what is important is that the government needs, and the DG budget also admitted yesterday that the debt really is a problem. So they need to sell down their assets, raise 30 to 50 billion, and to be able to pay down some of this debt. Because at the end of the day, this is really where we have the challenge.
How about those things they claim as positives? Trade surplus, 5.8 trillion. Foreign reserve, $42 billion. And
okay, so my question, what does it mean? Has it impacted the overall economy? Has inflation come down? Have we seen growth? No. While you might see some green shoots, which we must admit that, okay, maybe on the monetary side, we have achieved some level of stability or a significant level of stability on the monetary side. We still have challenges on the fiscal side because the highest line item on the budget is debt service. Yeah. So the problem now is the fact that while we have resolved the subsidy problem, we have created another problem, which is debt. Our debt has become unsustainable. Okay, we have debt of close to 150 trillion, and we're using close to we've seen now 16 trillion a year on debt service, which is $10 billion. That was close to the same amount of the subsidies. So we have replaced subsidy with debt. So now that we've resolved the subsidy problem, so now this year, we now need to resolve this debt problem so that we can now grow the economy on a sustainable basis. So this is really where we are right now. So yes, we can look at those achievements, but the question is that, okay, so what? And now, because of this debt problem, we should remember that Nigeria's credit rating is still CAA1, which is junk bond, non-investment grade status. They generate
revenue, as they say they would,
The revenues that are going to be generated can only come from the oil and gas industry very quickly in terms of production. By getting to 2.5 million barrels a day, if we get to 2.5 million barrels a day, the equation has changed. If we sell down these JV assets, you raise between 35 to 50 billion, we would change the game. And things will begin to work out properly. But this debt profile that we have made progress by removing subsidy, but right now, on the other hand now, we now have a debt problem that we need to address.
Well, on that note, Tilewa Adebajo, Chairman, CFG Advisory, we would like to thank you very much for joining us.